Imagine you are walking, right? And suddenly you are completely surrounded by towering vegetation.
Oh yeah, like complete immersion.
Exactly. The stalks are so thick, so high, that your sense of direction just vanishes in an instant.
Right.
The sunlight gets blocked out, casting everything in this dim, disorienting green glow. The normal sounds of the world are muffled, replaced entirely by the wind violently rustling the leaves around you. And then, standing in that suffocating isolation, you realize something terrifying.
You're not alone.
You are not alone.
Yeah, that terrifying shift, going from just taking a casual walk to realizing you might suddenly be at the bottom of the food chain.
Right.
It's exactly what happens when our primary senses are stripped away. So for today's deep dive, we are looking at what happens to the human psyche when it steps into an environment that completely obscures vision and hearing.
And we've got some incredible source material for this.
We do. We are drawing from 3 first-hand accounts of encounters in rural cornfields. And our mission today is really focusing on the breakdown of situational awareness and, the primal predator-prey dynamics that emerge in the dark.
Yeah, we're going to look at 3 escalating scenarios. Starting with an accidental entry into a hostile environment, then moving to a slow burn psychological stalking, and finally, an active, calculated home invasion.
It gets intense.
It really does. So I want to start in rural Nebraska with an account that perfectly illustrates how quickly a familiar environment becomes hostile.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So we have a child who bikes to school every day, and the route goes right past this massive, sprawling cornfield.
Right.
The parents had one non-negotiable rule. Do not cut through the cornfield under any circumstances.
Which is, a very necessary boundary.
Oh, absolutely.
For a child, a field of that scale isn't just a crop. It is unmapped, visually impenetrable territory.
Yeah, and the kid actually respects this rule for years, just taking the long way around on the paved roads. But one weekday afternoon, riding home from school, the bike chain pops completely off the gears.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the kid tries to fix it, gets grease everywhere, but the chain is just completely jammed.
And I'm guessing no cell phone.
Exactly, no cell phone. Hitchhiking is obviously out of the question, and the idea of walking a broken, heavy bike miles around the perimeter of this massive field is agonizing.
Right, so they weigh their options.
Exactly. So looking at the corn, they decide to take a, quote, quick shortcut.
The classic inciting incident.
Yep.
It's prioritizing short-term convenience over established safety protocols. But the really crucial element here is the immediate sensory shift, the moment that child pushes their bike past the first few rows of stalks.
Because it just changes everything.
Right. The physics of that environment literally alter their perception of reality.
The kid describes it as the world just dropping away. Because, they are a child. The stalks feel like skyscrapers. The scale of the world distorts. A massive amount of light is blocked out by the canopy, and the noise from the nearby road just ceases. It is replaced by this really eerie silence.
Well, dense vegetation actually acts as a massive acoustic dampener.
Wait, really? Just the leaves?
Yeah, you have millions of broad leaves acting as baffles, absorbing sound waves. It creates a paradoxical acoustic environment.
How so?
So the rustling of the leaves masks low-frequency external noises, meaning you cannot hear danger approaching from a distance.
Wow, okay.
But suddenly, every high-frequency sound immediately nearby sounds absolutely deafening. By removing visual horizons and warping those auditory cues, the environment induces a profound biological sense of vulnerability.
And that vulnerability is tested almost immediately.
What happened?
So the kid is walking for a bit, dragging this heavy bike, feeling increasingly uneasy, and starts hearing a faint rustling sound coming from just off the path.
And it's not the wind.
No, it isn't the wind, because when the kid stops walking, the rustling stops.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when the kid starts walking again, the rustling starts again.
See, the synchronization of movement is where the psychological dynamic fundamentally shifts.
Right.
You go from simply being lost to being hunted. Random rustling is an animal foraging. Synchronized rustling implies a conscious intelligence.
That is so creepy.
It's a predator actively assessing its prey, matching their pace to remain undetected while gathering information.
So the kid is struggling to breathe, picking up the pace, but stubbornly refusing to leave the broken bike behind.
Naturally.
Eventually, the rustling stops completely. The kid feels a wave of relief, decides to switch rows just to be absolutely safe, turns a corner, and freezes.
What do they see?
Standing dead center in the middle of the path is a man.
And I'm guessing he doesn't look like he belongs there.
Not at all. The physical description of this individual defies every baseline expectation. This isn't a farmer checking on his irrigation.
Right.
His clothes are heavily soiled and torn to shreds, but the detail that just burns into my brain is his arms.
What about his arms?
He has long, deep marks etched directly into the skin of both arms.
Oh my God.
Yeah. They look like deliberate scratches or carvings, and he is just standing there, arms at his sides, staring.
That is terrifying.
Then, in this incredibly low, raspy voice, he asks the kid if they are lost. He takes a step forward, holds his hands out, and says he'll help them find their way home.
A textbook predatory lure.
Yeah, exactly.
He is attempting to exploit the child's obvious distress by adopting the guise of a rescuer. What makes it deeply unsettling is that his physical appearance violently contradicts that comforting role.
I look at this cornfield like a naturally occurring sensory deprivation tank.
That's a great way to put it.
When you are suddenly plunged into an environment that starves your brain of its normal visual and auditory input, your mind scrambles. You become hyper-vulnerable to whoever is pulling the strings in the dark.
Right.
And this man clearly mapped the layout of that field. He used the acoustic dampening and the restricted sight lines to funnel the kid right into his path.
The sensory deprivation tank is an apt comparison. He controlled the auditory environment with the synchronized stalking, essentially forcing a change in direction.
Right. Pushing the kid where he wanted.
Exactly. And then he positioned himself as the sole focal point in a visually overwhelming space.
Thankfully, the sheer terror overrides the paralysis for this kid.
Thank goodness.
The kid drops the bike and bolts, and the disguise drops instantly. The man starts chasing, crashing violently through the stalks.
So he drops the friendly act completely.
Immediately, the kid ducks into a narrow row, crouches into a tiny ball, and hides. As the man runs past, the kid notices he is holding what looks like a coiled rope.
Oh, wow.
And he's muttering to himself, quote, "I'll find him."
The immediate transition from a calm, helpful stranger to an aggressive, armed pursuer confirms the malicious intent was there from the start.
Absolutely.
Did the child get away?
Yeah, the child stays hidden for hours, cramping and trembling, waiting for complete darkness before finally crawling out and running home to their terrified parents.
I can't even imagine.
Right. The relief of making it home should be the end of it. But a few weeks go by.
Okay.
The parents had already bought a new bike. One afternoon, the kid gets home from school, walks up to the house, and sitting right there on the front porch is the old, broken bike.
No way.
The exact one abandoned deep in the cornfield.
See, that forces a massive psychological shift for the victims.
Wait, help me understand the motivation there. Was returning the bike some kind of twisted gift? Or is it a calculated threat meant to communicate, like, I know exactly where you sleep?
It's definitely the latter. If we look at the behavior of territorial predators, returning a specific personal item like that is a profound psychological violation.
How so?
It destroys the conceptual boundary between the wild threat of the field and the safe haven of the home.
I see.
The stalker is sending a clear message. You thought you escaped my domain, but your domain belongs to me too. It is a demonstration of absolute access.
That is chilling.
The parents packing up and moving the family away immediately was the only correct response to that level of boundary testing.
Yeah, that violation of the safe haven is terrifying, but it assumes the predator stays in the wild until you're vulnerable.
Right.
But what happens when the safe haven itself is the target from day one?
That's a great transition, because while the first story involved stumbling into someone's hidden domain, what happens when the threat slowly encroaches on yours?
Exactly. This brings us to the second account in the sources, shifting from an accidental encounter to deliberate stalking.
Tell us about this one.
So there's an aspiring author, 28 years old, who moves back home to help their aging parents run an isolated family farm.
Okay.
It is surrounded by vast stretches of corn. The author sets up a workspace in a cozy third-floor bedroom, working late into the night. It sounds completely idyllic.
Usually how these things start.
Right. Until one evening just before sunset, the author looks out the window and spots a figure. It is standing perfectly still right between two rows of corn at the far edge of the property.
Here we observe a deeply flawed yet universal human psychological defense mechanism. Rationalization. Confronted with a blatant anomaly, the brain immediately attempts to normalize it.
And the rationalization here is staggering. The author assumes it's a mannequin, or a scarecrow, or just someone from the neighbor's farm checking the crops.
Of course.
The author even thinks to themselves it would make a really cool, moody photograph.
Wow.
I know. And when the mother gets involved, she casually blames it on the elderly neighbor's son, calling him an oddball and insisting he is harmless.
We possess a powerful innate bias toward safety. Acknowledging that a motionless human silhouette staring at your home is an active threat requires a massive biological response.
Like fight or flight.
Exactly. It requires a spike in cortisol and adrenaline dump, immediate action. The brain wants to avoid that extreme caloric and hormonal cost if possible.
So it just makes up a safe story.
Right. Categorizing the threat as a scarecrow or an eccentric neighbor neutralizes the danger entirely in their minds, allowing them to remain in a low-stress state.
I understand the biology of wanting to save energy, but the naivety is so frustrating.
It really is.
Think of it less like a scary movie and more like cybersecurity.
Oh, I like that analogy.
It is like a hacker pinging a network firewall. You don't ignore the ping just because the hacker hasn't breached the mainframe yet. This figure is standing out there, mapping their routines, observing when the lights go out, testing their awareness.
Right.
Why is the default instinct to reach for a camera instead of calling the police?
Like a boiling frog, right?
Well, it's because of cognitive dissonance. The foundational belief is, my home is safe. When reality presents conflicting fact, a stalker at the edge of the property, the brain tries to rewrite the fact rather than destroy the foundational belief.
It's just easier to believe the lie.
It is psychologically easier to believe in a misplaced scarecrow than a dedicated predator.
Well, the firewall gets tested a little harder over the next few days.
How so?
The figure gets closer. It moves from the far edge of the field to just outside the property line.
Okay, that's a massive red flag.
Finally, the author gets frustrated, walks out to the edge of the field and yells, "Who's there?"
And what happens? The response is immediate. The figure turns, sprints, and physically dives into the corn stalks.
See, that physical reaction shatters the cognitive dissonance. A scarecrow doesn't sprint. A harmless neighbor doesn't dive into the dirt to avoid being seen.
So the author goes to the elderly neighbor's house the next morning to confront her about her oddball son.
And I'm guessing the son wasn't there.
No, they discover the neighbor hasn't been out of her house after dark in weeks due to poor health, and her son moved away years ago.
Oh, wow. So the figure in the corn is a complete stranger.
A total stranger, and yet the father dismisses calling the police because the stalker hasn't done anything technically illegal yet.
That is such a common fatal mistake.
Which brings us to the climax. The author is working out in the barn late at night. Suddenly, the entire farm goes pitch black. The power is completely cut.
Oh, no.
The author doesn't have a phone on them, so they grab a heavy flashlight and sprint out of the barn toward the house. But they stop halfway across the yard.
Why?
They hear aggressive rustling in the corn, mere feet away.
The stalkers has now dictated the terms of the engagement. By cutting the power, the stalker neutralizes the home's primary defensive advantage lighting.
Right.
This levels the sensory playing field, plunging the author into the same visual deprivation we saw in the first scenario, while the stalker remains completely in their element.
So the author turns the flashlight beam toward the rustling. The beam hits a man.
What does he look like?
He is bald, but he has these strange, erratic patches of hair left on his scalp. He is wearing heavy overalls. He is staring directly at the author with a furious, menacing look.
Terrifying.
And in his hands, he is holding a rusty garden trowel. The author drops all pretense, turns, and ironically sprints directly into the cornfield to hide.
Using the attacker's own environment against him.
Exactly. The man chases, but the author dives deep into a row, staying dead silent in the dark while the man runs past. The author eventually creeps back to the house and calls the cops.
And did the police find anything?
They search the property and find the cause of the power outage. It wasn't a blown fuse. Someone had deliberately dumped a bucket of water directly onto the main breaker box to trip the system.
Dumping water on a high-voltage breaker isn't just a prank. It's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, completely unhinged.
It represents a severe escalation.
Yeah.
The stalker moved from passive observation to active sabotage. It was a calculated siege tactic designed to draw the occupants out of their fortified structure and into the vulnerable dark.
Using the environment as a staging ground for a siege is a terrifying concept.
It really is.
We are moving from predators who rely on the field for concealment to a predator who weaponizes the environment to manipulate their target's behavior.
Right. The first man waited in the field, the second stalked from the edge, but this is an entirely new level.
Exactly. And there is a case in Iowa that takes this exact concept to its absolute extreme.
Let's hear it.
A man rents a dirt-cheap, highly isolated house. It sits right next to a massive, abandoned-looking cornfield. The field is so incredibly close to the property that you could physically touch the exterior of the house and the wooden fence separating the field at the exact same time.
So the buffer zone between the safe haven and the unknown is virtually non-existent.
Non-existent. It's a windy October night. The tenant is out on his back deck, smoking a cigarette, looking out over the yard. Out of nowhere, cutting through the heavy wind, he hears a scream.
What kind of scream?
It is sharp, high-pitched, and unmistakably human. It sounds exactly like a young boy in severe distress, and it is coming from deep inside the dark cornfield.
If we analyze the biology of human hearing, an infant or child's cry is an evolutionary trigger.
It just hits you instantly.
Yes, it is a frequency specifically designed by nature to bypass our logical assessment centers, the prefrontal cortex, and directly activate the amygdala.
So you don't even think about it.
Exactly. It forces empathy and protective instincts to the surface instantly.
It operates just like an anglerfish in the deep ocean.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
Right. The anglerfish dangles a glowing lure in the pitch black. The prey sees a light, gets curious, and swims right into the massive jaws waiting behind it. This scream was an auditory lure. It weaponized human empathy to draw the victim out of a highly defensible position.
A profound biological exploit. The predator understands that logic might keep the homeowner inside, but a child's scream will force them out.
The tenant reacts exactly as you'd expect. He doesn't think. He runs inside, grabs a hunting rifle and a flashlight, jumps the fence, and charges into the cornfield.
Of course he does.
He is yelling out for the kid, picking random rows, sweeping the beam around frantically. He eventually calls the police.
Do they find anything?
The cops show up, and they search the field together for 30 solid minutes. They find absolutely zero trace of anyone. No footprints in the mud, no broken stalks, nothing.
Wow.
The cops leave, and the guy goes back inside, trying to convince himself it was just a cruel prank by local teenagers.
See, the attacker has now successfully tested the entire defense grid of the property.
The scream was a test.
The scream was a probe. The attacker learned the homeowner's response time, noted that he is armed, and mapped his exact behavioral patterns when provoked.
And he acts on that intelligence immediately.
What happens next?
Later that same night, the tenant is upstairs getting ready for bed. He looks out his bedroom window and his stomach drops. Out in the windy cornfield, there is an orange glow. Small flames are rising up, flickering wildly in the dry stalks.
Arson in agricultural conditions is an immediate, catastrophic threat to the surrounding structures.
But wait, help me understand the logic here. If the attacker's ultimate goal is to get inside the house, why start a massive fire?
Yeah, it seems like a bad idea, right?
Yeah, doesn't a fire just guarantee that the homeowner calls 911, bringing the police and fire departments rushing to the scene? It seems counterintuitive to draw all that attention to your crime scene.
It seems counterintuitive until you analyze it as a military diversion.
Okay, break that down for me.
The attacker knows the police are at least 20 to 30 minutes away based on the earlier response time. By setting the fire, the attacker creates a vacuum of attention.
So all eyes are on the fire.
Exactly. The fire is a massive, urgent threat that cannot be ignored. It forces the homeowner to fully commit all of his physical presence, his line of sight, and his panic toward the field.
Wow.
The attacker isn't worried about the fire department arriving in 20 minutes because the attacker only needs 2 minutes with the homeowner completely distracted. The house is left entirely unguarded, and in the panic, the doors are likely left unlocked.
It is a flawless, calculated 1-2 punch.
Absolutely.
The guy completely panics. He calls 911, screaming into the phone. He grabs a garden hose from the side of the house, jumps the fence again, and sprints into the dark field to fight the fire himself, knowing the fire department will take too long.
Which is exactly what the attacker wanted.
He actually manages to soak the flames and put the fire out. He is standing there, drenched in sweat and hose water, catching his breath in the dark. He happens to look back up at his house.
And there, standing perfectly still inside his own upstairs bedroom window, looking down at him, is a figure.
The blitz attack was executed perfectly. The intruder used the time bought by the diversionary fire to bypass the perimeter and enter the sanctuary.
The tenant drops the hose and sprints back to the house. He bursts through the front door into the kitchen and freezes. The place is completely ransacked.
In just those few minutes?
Yeah. The fridge is thrown wide open, cabinets are torn apart, dishes are smashed all over the floor. In the chaos, he hears the front door slam as the intruder escapes out the other side.
Did they ever catch him?
Well, the cops and firefighters finally show up. Because attempted arson is a major felony, they bring in tracking dogs, they bring in extra units, they search the entire area.
Yeah.
And again, the dogs find no scent. The suspect vanished entirely on foot, not a single trace. The guy slept with his rifle on the floor every single night until he finally broke his lease and moved out. The psychological damage in that kind of violation is profound because the sanctuary of the home was breached by turning the residents' own protective instincts and crisis response against them.
Put yourself in that tenant's shoes for a second. If you were standing on your deck in the dead of night and you heard a terrified child screaming from the darkness, would your logical survival instincts kick in? Or would your empathy override your brain, forcing you to run blindly into the unknown?
It's a tough call.
These accounts remind us that isolation isn't just a measure of how many miles you live from the nearest city. Isolation is about vulnerability. It is about what happens when our senses are compromised and our environment is weaponized against us.
The primary takeaway from synthesizing all these accounts is really clear. When environments obscure our vision, whether it is towering agricultural stalks, absolute darkness, or a combination of both, we are at an immediate, severe disadvantage.
We have to be aware of that.
In those moments when something feels wrong, we must trust our primal instincts immediately. We cannot afford the caloric luxury of rationalizing the danger away as a scarecrow, a neighbor, or a prank.
I want to leave you with one final, deeply unsettling thought to mull over, specifically regarding that last story in Iowa.
Oh boy.
We naturally assume the high-pitched scream was a prank or an adult predator mimicking a cry for help to act as bait.
Right, the auditory lure.
But consider the facts. The police brought in tracking dogs, searched the area twice, and found absolutely no footprints and no trace of an adult fleeing the scene.
That's true.
What if the scream wasn't an imitation? What if there actually was a child out there in the dark, and the arson, the trash kitchen, and the break-in were just the chaotic aftermath of something far worse that successfully slipped away while everyone was looking at the fire?